I wanted to just start by telling you a little bit about like who I am, because I think most people here aren't very familiar with me, and maybe you haven't seen me before. So I'm from Iceland. I live in Italy at the moment, but I grew up in Iceland. I studied biology at the University of Iceland, so I have a bachelor's degree in biology, and then I went to Denmark to study veterinary medicine at the Royal Veterinary and Agricultural University, that it was called back then. And then I started working in Iceland after I graduated. I started working in Iceland in a small animal veterinary clinic. And then I became, well, I already had developed an interest for behavior. So I decided to add a degree in behavioral counseling. And I did study that in the UK. He's like, at the moment I have two dogs. That's Sunna, the smaller one, and the bigger one is called Odin. He only has one eye, hence the name. He's a little Italian street dog that I rescued from the street here in Italy. And I want to tell you a little bit about why I started studying animal behavior. I knew ever since I was a child that I wanted to be a veterinarian. So I was always preparing for that. Even when I did the biology studies at the University of Iceland, I knew that I wanted to go on and study veterinary medicine. But it wasn't, we don't have a vet school in Iceland, so I had to go abroad. So I decided to start with the biology and prepare and apply for schools as well, because it's not so easy to get into vet school. Maybe you know about that. This talk here taught me a big lesson. I think a lot of us who are into dogs, we have this one dog that taught us a big lesson. And for me, it was this dog, Snout. Snout was the first dog that I got as a puppy. So this was while I was studying biology. It was before I started studying veterinary medicine. So I just moved in with my husband. We got married, and we had a kid, and we had the dog. So it was like this. I think it's a very common story. So we trained her with like the methods that we knew. That was, of course, quite limited in the beginning. We read some books, we went to a training class, and we asked people who already had dogs that we knew, and got some advice here and there, and did our best with the training. And we tried to follow the advice of dog trainers that we had asked and trained with. But when we moved to Denmark, and I started to realize that our dog had developed a behavioral problem. She did not like children, and we had a small boy. And eventually we had an issue where she bit a child that was visiting us. And this was a great shock to us, because we had never thought that she would do anything like that. She grew up with this, our little boy, and we didn't really understand why it had happened. But we also didn't feel safe having a dog in the house who was aggressive towards children. So we ended up opting for euthanasia. And this was a big blow for me, especially because I had, I was a biologist, I was studying veterinary medicine, but I felt like I didn't know very much about behavior. And somehow I felt that I had made a mistake or mistakes when I was training her, and I didn't know what they were, and I didn't know how to fix it. So I became very interested in this topic, and I decided to do a study when this was like my final thesis in vet school, and I studied the reasons for euthanasia of dogs in Iceland. And I found out that 22% of the people who brought their dog into the vets for euthanasia listed a behavioral problem as the reason for the euthanasia. So this is, these are, the columns are still in Icelandic there. So the first one, 21% is old age, 37% is disease, 8% accidents, 22% behavioral problem, 6% like personal reasons, like we're moving or something happened in the family, we can't keep the dog anymore, and 8% was like various other reasons. So you can see that behavioral problems is a huge issue. It's a big reason why people give up their dogs first, not only to euthanasia, but also they give up their dogs to a shelter. So this is a very big issue, and I became very passionate about trying to help fix this problem. I've kind of been working in this space for a few years, working as a veterinary behaviorist in Iceland, first in my clinic, and now for the last few years, I've been doing this exclusively. And so I've kind of developed a method that I feel is working for my clients. And of course, it's based on scientific studies on behavior. I'm using positive reinforcement. So people who know about positive dog training, or there's different names for it, but these are like modern methods that are based on scientific studies. There's no punishment or threats or using fear or intimidation to train the dog, and always trying to understand why the dog is doing what they're doing and what's the best way to teach them, and also their emotional state, which I think is super important and not sometimes a little bit overlooked. So I call it the Sunny Way method. After my dog Sunna. She was the kind of the first dog that I trained. She's also actually a dog that came to me as a grown-up dog and had behavioral issues. So I, in the title of the workshop, I talked about the 5 steps. So I'm going to go through the 5 steps, and so just to tell you right away what the steps are. It's so first you have to identify what is the problem. You have to understand why the dog is doing what it's doing. I think that's super, super important to understand that. It's the key to everything. And then you have to know how dogs learn, like how do dogs absorb information? What are the best training methods? And then also it's super important to have a realistic application of the methods. So I've developed my method a little bit, because in the beginning, the way I learned to do it when I was studying, I felt it wasn't a very effective method, because I was doing single sessions with people. So they would I would give them like a lot of information, like there was like this whole list of things you have to do. And I talked to them for 2 hours, and then I realized that they were not absorbing everything, and it's just a lot of people were giving up or having problems because they didn't know how to incorporate all this training into the daily routine with their dogs. So they ran into problems. So I decided to change a little bit and turn it also into a membership rather than doing single sessions with people, because I feel that's more effective, and people have to be aware that this is a long game. Like there's no quick fix. It's there's no magic wand. There's no dog whisper where I can just whisper in your dog's ear and fix all their problems like they do sometimes on TV. There's work to be done, and it takes time for for the dog parent to learn all the steps and the methods, and also for the dog to get over their issues. It just takes time. So I'm not gonna tell you that there's a quick fix solution. So first of all, what is the problem? I've done some surveys in my audience, like on my mailing list. I have a few thousand people on my mailing list, and I have on social media as well. And I've done surveys where I ask them, like, what is the biggest problem that you're dealing with? And usually the biggest problem that comes up is barking. That's like the #1 reason that people start following me, because their dog barks too much. It's like more than 50% mentioned barking. So then we have to think about barking. What is barking? Like, barking is really normal behavior for dogs, right? Dogs bark. That's one form of communication that they have, and it's completely normal. But it can still cause a problem for the owner. So sometimes it's just normal behavior, for example, normal greeting behavior, like barking at guests. This can be a problem for the owner, even though it's completely normal for the dog. So the dog doesn't think there is any problem. It's only the owner who feels that there is a problem. Sometimes it can be normal behavior, as in, and that is quite often that they are showing like fearful behavior. They're barking because they're scared, or it's somehow displaced. So they are like barking much more than normally. Like normally, if a dog is just excited to see a guest arrive, for example, they stop barking when the guest comes inside and start the greeting behavior. But if they've developed a problem, especially with their emotional state, like they have fear or anxiety, they will keep barking. And sometimes they go into like this frenzy-like state. And I know that if you have a dog like that, you know what I'm talking about with the frenzy, where it's like they can't stop themselves, and they become like they zone out, and they're just focused on their emotional state, and they don't listen to the owner. And then there's the third kind, which is abnormal behavior, which is behavior that the dog is doing, but it's not normal behavior for a dog. So this can be, for example, like chasing invisible shadows, chewing on their skin when there's no skin condition underlying, or like sometimes they're like snapping into the air. It can be like this kind of weird behavior, which is not normal for dogs. So in that case, normally I suggest that people seek help from a veterinary behaviorist, and you might want to get like a private appointment with someone. The membership is not, might not be enough for this kind of cases. So I still do, of course, private consultations, but they are a little bit different format than what I used to do in the beginning. So to understand the reason why the dog is doing, and so understand the problem, you have to understand what is normal and what is not normal. So, and to understand what's normal and what's not normal, you have to understand normal body language of a dog, or normal behavior, normal dog behavior. And I find that it's actually, we feel that we know, yes, of course I know what is normal dog behavior, but actually a lot of people, they aren't aware of all the different behaviors and the signals and the body language of the dog and what it means. So this is where I usually start the journey with my clients. So I'm just going to, like, I'm not going to go into a deep dive here, but I'm just going to like go through a few things. So first of all, of course, how do we know what's normal versus abnormal? So first you have to, like I said, you have to be able to look at the dog and see the normal body behavior and or the body language of the dog. So for example, you have to look at each part of the dog separately first and learn about like the ears, the eyes, the mouth, everything like that. And then you can put it all together and look at the whole body. So with the ears, for example, you can see in the picture of the border collie, the brown and white one. This is it's just an alert position. You can also see that the face is calm and the dog is just looking forward and is has like the ears are like at the side of the head, just like hanging down normally. When they are scared, like the dog in the top picture on the other side, the ears go back. And when they are very aroused, like the barking dog, you can see the hairs on the back are standing up, like he's barking and showing all the teeth. And sometimes they get like very stiff. So the ears move from being like tucked back to going forward and being like stiff forward. The eyes, the dog which is on my left, I don't know if the zoom is mirroring the image, but the big image on the side, you can see that this dog is a little bit apprehensive. So the ears are like a little bit pulled back and he's looking like sideways, and he's probably looking at somebody standing next to the person with the camera from the angle that I see on the picture. So you can see the white of the eyes. And normally, like you can see in the little puppy picture in the bottom, when the dog is just looking at you relaxed with the relaxed eyes, and you also look at the muscles around the eyes. When the eyes are relaxed, you just see the brown or the black eyes. You don't see the white of the eye normally in the dog, unless they are like moving their eyes to the side. So it's called different names in different countries. I learned to call it whale eyes, but I've heard people call it different names. And now I can't remember anymore what those other words are, but anyway. This is a whale eye. And you can see also in the top picture, unfortunately, the bigger dog has a lot of fur covering his eyes. So this will make it a little bit difficult for him to signal, like using his eyes for signaling, and also for other dogs to understand his signals. But he's probably, the way he looks, he has a very confident body posture, and he's like lifting his paw. And the other dog, smaller, looks like a puppy, and he's showing the whale eye. So he's like looking to the side and showing the bigger dog that he's like calm, not aggressive, not angry. So all these signals are like, they're using all this to signal to other dogs. So the face, when they are a little bit worried, like with the whale eyes, you can see that there's like a wrinkle, like the eyebrows are like a little bit wrinkled. Sometimes you can see wrinkles on the head, on the top of the head as well. Also the little dog with the glasses, he has like his eyebrow is raised a little bit and there's a little wrinkle. And when they are calm, like the Springer Spaniel, they're like the mouth is just hanging down. There's no wrinkles on the face, and the dog is just looking forward. And you can see that you can't see the white in the eyes. The mouth. So when they are relaxed, this is an Icelandic sheepdog, the bigger picture there. Who is just, and you can see there's no whale eye, the ears are just like normally erect, like in the center of the head, looking forward, just like with attention, but not just looking around. And the face is all calm, no wrinkles, and the mouth is closed, and he's breathing through his nose, which is normal for dogs. Dogs, of course, as we know, when they get hot, they start panting, so they open their mouth to pant and to cool down. But sometimes, like the dog in the picture with the girl who is like holding him in an embrace, sometimes the dog is panting not because they're too hot, but because they're nervous. So can you see the whale eye, the white in the eye of the dog? the tongue is hanging out, and the mouth is like it's pulled back a little bit, and you can see a little wrinkle there, like in the at the edge of the mouth. So I looked around, and actually there was a study, very controversial study done on this phenomenon. So I have access to this database with pictures. And I was trying to find a picture of a dog being hugged by a person that looked really calm, and I couldn't find one, which tells you a lot. And I'll talk more about this later. But actually, dogs usually, they're not terribly fond of hugging. And they show, like this dog is showing like mild signs of being uncomfortable, like not to the point where they're like struggling to get away. And usually it's because like they are used to being held by people, so they just they don't complain, and they just like, but they are usually like they look like they're just waiting until the person stops hugging them. And in the bottom picture you can see this is a rather angry dog, so the edges of the mouth, like they start pulling forward when they get angry, and they pull up the lips and show the teeth. And the feet also, like when they're a little bit nervous, like the puppy that's by itself there. They're both beagles, but it's not the same one. They lift their dog. You can also see in the other picture, the beagle is like lifting one paw, showing that they're like not, it's like appeasing signal, or a calming signal to the other dog, saying like, I'm just relaxed, I'm not going to attack you. And the other dog is more confident and has his paw raised on the other dog, on the smaller one. So let's get to the next step. So first of all, we understand now what is the body language of the dog, like what's the dog trying to signal. And then we look at the problem that we have, and we try to understand, why is my dog doing that? So actually, communication in dogs is always aimed at reducing tension. So if two strangers meet, if your dog meets another dog, they're always trying to, and that's what all these calming signals are about, is to reduce tension. And they don't fight very often. They do a lot of like play fighting, which is normal behavior for dogs. It's where they are like they're like maybe running around. They might be like grabbing the fur of the other dog. I'm sure you've seen this behavior, like when you go to the dog park, the dogs are playing, they're jumping up on each other, and they might pull on each other's fur and stuff, but they're not like maybe pull on the tail of the other dog or something when they're like really happy playing. But that's not a fight, a real fight. They're just playing. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the dominance myth. I think probably the people who are present here know about this and are not so much into that. But actually, in reality, real fights, and not just between dogs, but with animals in general, a lot of animal behavior is centered around reducing tension and like deciding who wins what, like territory or mates or whatever, just using like their body language, like showing off rather than actual fighting. Because anytime a wild animal is injured, there's a risk of infection. So when an animal has an infection, it can be lethal. So that's a big deal, and they're always trying to avoid that. So it's not true what people used to say, that your dog is always trying to win and trying to dominate over everyone else in the household. They're not trying to do that. They're just trying to live their life and be happy like the rest of us. So what I see is that the most common reasons for the dog misbehaving is fear, anxiety, and boredom. So these are actually the most common reasons. It's not dogs being, oh, my dogs are being like cheeky, or they're they don't listen, or like they have bananas in their ears, they don't respect me, or whatever. That's usually not the reason, I find, when you dive into the cases. So I wanted to also explain here the difference between fear and anxiety. So fear is a fear of a thing or an event. So for example, a dog is afraid of men. So when the dog sees a man, he becomes scared. So he might show some type of fear, like the tail tucked between his legs, shackles raised, barking, things like that. And when the person that they are afraid of, the trigger, as we call it, goes away, the fear goes away. So it's not and the behavior changes. And but anxiety comes from thinking of the trigger when you can't see it. So if the dog is quite often, like if a dog who is afraid of men lives somewhere where men come quite often, and some of them might be conceived by the dog as being aggressive, they start to become afraid even when men are not there, because they're afraid a man might come. And that is anxiety. So it's like a constant state of mind. And that makes it in many ways more difficult for the dog to, or it's just a really contributes in a negative way to the dog's quality of life. And this is very common, especially with rescue dogs that have had some bad experiences and they've become anxious. Sometimes there is an event that triggers the anxiety. For example, if a dog has separation anxiety, they see the owner putting on their shoes, taking the keys and the jacket, and getting ready to leave. And then the fear starts to build up in the dog, even when the owner is still there, like before the owner leaves. So, all right. So what is a dog? Dogs are, they came from wolves. We all know that. They're originally very related, genetically very related to wolves. Wolves became domesticated a really, really long time ago. And they started as scavengers around humans. And then people actually started breeding dogs thousands of years ago. So they started having like different breeds for like hunting, companionship, etc. But they didn't have like all the different breeds that we have now. But there was like types that had started to form already back then. So a dog is not a wolf. Even though dogs can mate with wolves, it's not the same species because of they're so different. And a lot of problems with dog training, I think, has come from like studies being done on wolves and then extrapolated directly onto dogs, first of all. And also, second of all, a very, very popular book that like started a lot of the myths was done not even on wild wolves, but on captive wolves. So they weren't even displaying, and they were captive and not in their pack, like normal wolf pack, but with groups of unrelated wolves, and they just display different behaviors than they would if they are in their normal environment. So there was a book published in the 70s, and it's been like retracted by the author now, and he's admitted that a lot of the things that he wrote about in his book don't apply to dogs. But anyway, it's difficult to go back when these myths are so popular and they just keep going around. But I think it's also important for us to understand the difference between humans and dogs. And this is related to the picture I was showing you earlier about the girl hugging the dog. So people are genetically related to apes. So, and apes are just different from dogs, from canines. We like to keep eye contact. So for example, when we are talking to each other, we like to look each other in the face. We have the eyes, we have like a flat face and the eyes are in front of our face. So we face each other and we look at each other directly, and we like to keep eye contact, which is considered polite in our society. And we are always touching and hugging each other. This is just what we do as a species. Of course, I'm speaking in generalities here. It's not, of course, not every person likes touching and hugging, but in general, people are like, we're a social species. That's also one of the reasons that we like to have dogs around, because they are a social species that normally has small family groups, not so unlike us. But for dogs, a lot of this behavior is not like this hugging and touching all the time is not, it's not natural for them. So dogs that grow up with people, they're just used to being touched and hugged by people. So they don't oppose it normally, and they just accept that this is part of living with your human companions. So they don't usually struggle, and some even learn to like it. So there are some dogs who like hugging and seek out being in the arms of the owner. So, but in general, they are not huggers like we are. So if you have your, I think it's a really good exercise also just to think about like the signs of stress or anxiety or fear that you have seen in your dog's behavior. With rescue dog parents, people usually are aware that their dogs are showing some signs of fear and stress. So normally I would also, like in my content, like I go and dive much deeper into all the behavior and the calming signals and the stress signals than what we have time for today. So it's a good idea to like write down a few things that you've seen. And then let's look a little bit into how dogs learn. So I'm trying to be mindful of the time here as well. So it's important also to think about the breeds. I did mention the breeds a little bit, like breeding. So the modern breeds that we have are mostly from the 19th century and onwards. And they have different characteristics. So they have different kind of behaviors that are like hunting breeds don't have the same behavior as herding breeds or companion breeds, for example. Like I think everyone has a little bit idea of this in their head. But there are sometimes very specific behaviors that are related to specific breeds. So it's good to be mindful of this when you have a purebred dog, or even if you have a mixed breed dog. You can sometimes see a little bit like where, if you know about the different breeds, you know, like if your dog is mixed, like some breeds that you can tell, you can extrapolate or figure out some things from that. And I wanted to also mention extreme breeding here, because some breeds they just have difficulty using their body language when they're communicating with other dogs. So for example, dogs that have like a really flat face and they have a lot of like lines or wrinkles in their face. And maybe you remember from the first section that I was talking about the wrinkles on the face. And these dogs sometimes have difficulty communicating with other dogs because the other dogs just think that they have a very aggressive face. So they get into fights and more than other dogs, just because of this. Also, if they are bred not to have a tail, or sometimes even we don't just breed them, but we also like modify their looks by, for example, like taking off the tail or cutting the ears or something like that. That completely changes the their ability to signal to other dogs. So we have to take that into account as well. So this is also a good idea to write down, like, how has my dog's breed affected the behavior of my dog? How is my dog's behavior influenced by their breed? And are there things that happen that could be attributed to this? So there's always the classic argument of nature versus nurture, like where, how do they learn? Like, are they just born like this? Like what I was talking about with the breed specific behaviors. And but also they learn from, and they actually start learning like from the beginning. They learn from their mother before they are before they grow up. So for example, I think I mentioned earlier that fear can be genetic. So you can have a genetic propensity for fear or fearful behavior, but they can also, puppies can learn fear from their mother. So for example, if the mother is really scared of men, just to name an example, or men with hats, or women in high heels, or whatever it is that the trigger is, they can learn this from the mother as well. In general, so the rule of thumb is behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. And this is the main thing that we work with. So we want to reward the behavior that we want to see. So we in the training, we're always trying to set up the sessions and the training sessions so that the dog is doing something that we like, so we can reward it, and then they are more likely to repeat that behavior. And behavior that gets ignored gets reduced. So this is, so I actually put this picture here on purpose, the dog peeing on the floor and the pointy finger. This is like an old style dealing with peeing on the floor. So when, if we think when the puppies are small and we're trying to teach them to pee outside on a specific surface. So dogs actually don't look up to see if there's a ceiling or not. They look down, and they are attracted to substrates that they get used to when they're a puppy. So if the dog always is used to peeing on grass, they prefer to pee on grass. Or if they are, some like city dogs prefer to pee on stone, and that's what they will do. And that's also why I recommend people not using those pads on the floor, because if your dog learns to pee on a pad, they don't learn to pee on grass. So it's a lot easier to just teach them from the start that you prefer this substrate. So when you start rewarding the puppy for peeing outside, they start realizing, some of them do it very quickly, that if they pee inside and nothing happens, but when they pee outside in the grass, they get treats. So of course they prefer to get the treats. So the other behavior, peeing on the floor, it just goes away. You don't even have to tell them not to do it, because they just want the rewards that comes from the other behavior. So this behavior just reduces. And now I wanted to do a little test, because of this thing that I was saying, like, and it's related to all of this. If you think about let's not say command, but a cue that your dog really knows very well. Most of the time, the best known cue is sit. Like, this is what all dogs know how to do. They know how to sit on cue. But what happens if you change something? So if anyone watching is, if you have your dog there and a treat, try standing up and get your dog to come over to you, and turn your back on the dog and ask them to sit. and see what happens. And let me know in the chat. Let's see if I can see the chat, or maybe you can tell me if anybody is typing something in the chat. So what often happens is that the dog will try to get in front of the owner to sit there because they don't like it if you change something. And if this happens, you can, and sometimes they only sit, depending on how much time and effort you've put into really training this. Sometimes they won't sit unless they are next to you. For example, if you go outside and your dog is 5 meters away and you say sit, will they sit down where they are, or will they come running to you and sit down next to you? So these are like subtle differences in the way that the dog understands the words that you're saying and the way we understand them, because we are using our language in a different way than the dog is. So for the dog, like, they don't speak English or Icelandic or Italian or whatever. Like I always speak Icelandic to my dogs, which is really funny because the first one was born in Hungary and the other one born in Italy. But they respond really well to Icelandic because I know that the language doesn't matter. They're not listening to my words. They're listening to my tone of voice and the way I'm rewarding them for specific behaviors, what I would like them to do. So they learn that way. They're not listening to my words. Sometimes if they sit when you turn your back and it's not a problem, you can try a different cue, like lie down or something else that you've taught the dog. So, I mean, some people have just really spent a lot of time training their dogs and they don't have any problem doing this. But it's just some food for thought. So it's not a test as in like there's a right or wrong answer. there's nothing like that. But it's just and sometimes people figure out already from the start that they have to work on basic things like sit. If they want the dog to always understand that the word sit means put your back side on the floor and have your front legs straight and sit up and listen to what I'm saying. So maybe you have to work on that. And then the training methods. So there are some methods that are more effective than others, and we have science to back us up in saying that some methods are more effective than others. Some methods are quite effective, like for example, using fear in training. It's very effective. Like I think we've all seen that. Like you can scare your dog to do what you want them to do, but it can backfire. You can end up having different kinds of problems. So I want to encourage people to be a leader versus a boss. What's the difference between a leader and a boss? Sometimes I use a slide with like pictures of like two famous people, and one person is a known like this evil person from history, and the other person is like this peacemaker. And I asked them, like, which one would you want to be your boss? Like, were they both effective? Like, was Hitler an effective boss? Yes, like he was very effective, but he wasn't a good boss. So there's a difference between being effective and being good. This is my little preach. Be a leader, not a boss. So when we're like, I'm not gonna dive into like really complicated learning theory here, but I just wanted to mention like the two pillars of learning theory: the classical conditioning, which is very, very simple learning. It's like just you connect two things together. So you connect, something happens and then something else happens, and the dog learns to connect these two things together. For example, a sound means a treat. For example, You open the door of your fridge. So does the dog get excited? That probably because they often get a treat when the fridge is open. So they just learn to connect the two together. And dogs are very effective at learning, like putting things together. They're not stupid at all. They're very smart. So they learn a lot of things. They learn, if you reach for the leash, now we're going out for a walk. So they get really excited. These are just like simple things that they pick up on their own, and you don't have to train them specifically to know what the leash means. And if you always say the same words, for example, let's go for a walk, then they start to understand the sound together with what's happening and then what happens next. And then there's operant conditioning, which is a little bit more complicated, and that's usually what we're working with when we're training the dogs to do something a little bit more complicated. So we're shaping the behavior specifically. So we're asking them to do something, and we're marking the behavior, which is usually we use treats for that. For marking, you can also use toys if your dog is not really into treats, but there are also ways that you can use if your dog is not into treats at all. There's a cure for that as well. So that's the easiest way, and we can actually use this to train dogs to do really complicated behaviors, like you've seen with people, for example, who train their dogs with like agility. Maybe somebody here is doing agility with their dog, or any kind of like complicated training. And we're using operant conditioning. And often it's like a combination of the two as well. A training method that's very popular and I use quite a lot is clicker training. And I like to use treats for the training. I don't think there's any problem with using treats. Personally, I mean, I like working, but I still wouldn't do it if I never got paid. So I think it's the same for the dogs. Like they're just, it's just more effective if they get like a really high value reward. And for most dogs, treats are high value rewards. If your dog doesn't like treats, like I said, there's ways to deal with that. Some dogs, like they just, for them, like the food, you could use their own food. Like you don't need special treats. You just use the regular food, because for them that's a treat. And I also put this picture at the bottom of the, what are they called, orcas, because there's a big tendency, and this is also like the old-fashioned style of training, is to use your hands, like touching the dog or trying to show them like what to do, or even like punishing them or whatever. But then you could ask yourself, like, how do you train an orca? Like, can you put a chain around the neck of the orca, or can you punish them with electric collar or rolled up newspaper or whatever? Or just scold them? Like, no, you can't. They're just gonna eat you. Like, you can't do that. So you have to figure out, and this is actually how clicker training started. Clicker training uses a combination of classical and operant conditioning to shape the behavior of the animal. It's very, very effective. The dogs really love it because it's fun, and it's completely hands-off. So it's very easy. Like, anyone can train an animal with a clicker. Like, you can be in a wheelchair. It doesn't matter. All you need is the clicker and some treats. And that's how they train the orcas and elephants and tigers. I don't know if you've seen, there's a really cool video online that, so they started using this in zoos. And there's a really cool video online from the zoo in Copenhagen, where the handler is using clicker training to take blood samples from a tiger. So the tiger they have like this hole in the enclosure. The tiger puts his foot into this little cage, and they take the blood sample, and the tiger is just sitting there like completely calm. So you can use it on any kind of animal. I've even, I have a nice story about butterflies as well, that you can even train butterflies. So let me see, we're starting to run. How much time do we have?
Up to you, Sif.
All right, so I'll just keep going then. So I wanted to just introduce the concept of the traffic lights as well. This is something that we also use in training. And for me, I think this is especially important for people who have rescue dogs, because we are usually dealing with fearful and anxious behavior. So it's important for the owner to understand the difference between the levels of behavior, or the levels of arousal and anxiety in the dog. So in the green light, they have a calm body and face. They are completely relaxed, or they might be playing, but in a carefree manner. So if you know about dog body language, then you can look at your dog and see, oh, now he's like really calm, he's very happy, and he's relaxed, just from looking at the face and the body. And then the yellow light is when they are showing calming signals or signs of anxiety or fear, like low level. So they're still able to focus on the owner. So they, for example, you're walking and the dog becomes alert, like they see something that they're a little bit scared of, but you're still able to talk to them, and they will take treats. So you can still work with them, but they're not completely calm. They might be showing signs like licking their nose or their lips, smacking their lips. You might see whale eyes or other signs of anxiety or fear. And then we have the red light. So this is, of course, a limited portion of your day. Like normally in your day-to-day, the dog doesn't go into the red light district very often, but they are. But these are events that happen where they go into this out of control behavior. So either it's like normal behavior, like barking, but it's just out of control, out of context. Or it could be, in some cases, they go into like abnormal behavior. Those that have abnormal behavior, I'm usually, like most of the cases, 95% of the cases or even more, are really normal behavior or just displaced normal behavior. They're not abnormal dog behavior. So when this happens, they go into this frenzy where they are like, you can't get their attention. Like they won't look at you, they won't sit or do anything that you ask them. And the digestion is cut off. So they will not take the treats. And this is because of the autonomic nervous system that I'm not going to dive into deeper here because we don't have time for that. So what we do is we try to work always in the green light. That's what we want. We want to work with a dog in the green light, because when they are in this state of mind, their mind is ready to absorb the information. They learn faster and better when you train in this state. You can do some work in the yellow light, and that's often what we do when we're trying to work with fear and anxiety. We're trying to lower the level. So we're trying to teach the dog to go from the yellow back to the green, or at least not to go into the red. But when we're in the red light, you can't do anything with the dog. Like this is the time where you just have to back away. You might even have to like pick your dog up if it's possible, or to move out of the situation that you're in, because you're not going to be able to teach them anything at this stage. So, and then, so the last part is how to apply all this on a daily basis. So there's even more to learn than what I've not like talked about everything today, but it's completely useless to know all this if you can't apply it. And I found out also working with people that you can't expect people to do everything right from the start. Like I can't give people like a 5-page list of things to do, because it just becomes too much and they give up, which is understandable if it's overwhelming. So What I like to do is to make things a little bit more fun and easy, and we're supposed to enjoy it. It's not supposed to be a chore where you have to like mark in your calendar, like, oh, tomorrow at 5 I have to train the dog. It's supposed to be fun. And I want people to also incorporate the training into their daily activities with the dog. So, for example, just when you're at the house with the dog, and notice just, and also this happens once you start learning more and you know the signals, you start noticing all the calming signals, and you notice the stress signals in your dog during the day. So I like for people to keep a journal and just to jot down like an estimate of like what portion of the day is my dog spending in the yellow zone, where they're like maybe a little bit pacing around. They lie down, but they don't like put their head down. They lie down, but they don't sleep. Like they sleep always with the one eye open. Like, is that like half the day and the rest of the day they're calm? Or is it like 80% of the day? Sometimes I have, like I had a client the other day, and they said like, well, once we learned like to notice all the stress signals, we just realized that our dog is stressed like 80% of the time during the day when they're awake. So that gives you something to work from. So the goal is to increase the green zone, the green light, to have that to be most of the day. It's normal for dogs to have some kind of arousal like during the day. It's not like if you see a stress signal, like you have to be panicking, like, oh my God, my dog is stressed, but you just notice it. And if it just like it's something that happens and it goes away and there's no problem, then okay, that's good. It's not a problem because this is normal behavior. But it's just a problem if the dog is experiencing a reduce in their quality of life because of this situation, or their emotional state, the fear or anxiety. So what I often do is I ask people to start by rewarding calm behavior and body language. So just have treats like here and there around the house. Like it's a good idea to have some jars here and there, so you could grab a treat if you're sitting on the couch, for example, and you see that your anxious dog finally is relaxed. Just start rewarding that. Reward the dog when they have like this calm face, closed mouth breathing, and like no wrinkles, no sad eyes, and reward that, because actually that helps the dog to understand and to relax. Also, just eating in itself, the act of eating, like chewing something or swallowing something and tasting something good, is a stress reduction in itself. I'm not saying you should just feed your dog until they get really fat, but just keep in mind that this can help. And quite often I see people getting into like this downward spiral already when their dogs are teenagers or like young dogs. The dogs get very excited, they're jumping around and they get a lot of attention. And finally, when the dog finally lies down and is relaxed, they don't get any attention, because the owner is so relieved that the dog is finally like, oh my God, like if I bring out the treats now, they're gonna start jumping again. Like, so we can't reward them for that. So they get into this like negative spiral where the dog only gets attention where he's being like hyperactive and mischievous, and never gets rewarded for being calm and relaxed. So this is one of the first things that I have people do. And then also, I wanted to just remind you of the definition of anxiety. And so the treatment for anxiety, like if your dog is anxious, sometimes people come to my workshops or seminars and they realize that their dog is anxious and they didn't really realize it before. So what we're trying to do here is break patterns of escalation. For example, when I was explaining before about the separation anxiety, when they see the owner preparing to leave and become scared. So we try to break the patterns by changing our patterns of behavior. And then we also use something that's called desensitizing and counter conditioning. And I want to like tell you a little story to explain this, because these are like technical terms. I don't know if you are familiar with them or not. But I like to tell the story so that people can understand it, because it's the same principles with humans as well. So if we take a story, let's, for example, for a moment, imagine that you are offered a job in Chicago. That's a picture of Chicago. And you, like, unless you're from there, maybe you haven't lived there before, but it's a great job and they're paying you and they're also giving you an apartment to live in. So you say, okay, fine, I'm gonna move to Chicago. And then you start talking to people, you start reading online, and then you find out like the Chicago has a really high crime rate. There's a lot of gun violence and all types of violence, and it's quite, it can be a dangerous city. So already before you leave, you're a little bit nervous. Then you go there, like you move into this apartment, and then you find out like you have to walk to work every day because you don't have a car yet. And you have to walk through this dark alley to get to your workplace. And if you imagine the feeling that you have when you're working, when you're walking somewhere where you haven't been before, and you already have this idea in your head that it's dangerous. And imagine like the feelings that you have when you're walking there. It's dark, the weather is not so great, it's like cold outside, there's a really suspicious guy like smoking there, and you have to pass, and like anytime you hear something, like if there's a sound anywhere, like you get startled and you're like, oh my god, what's that, like what's happening, oh my god. And then you hurry up and you are like a little bit scared, and you're like going a little bit faster. This is you in your yellow zone. But then you walk there every day for 2 weeks and nothing changes. It's always the same alley, it's always the same guy there, and nothing ever changes. So you start to let down your guard a little bit. You're more relaxed. You're like, maybe now I'm thinking about my work on the way. I'm not thinking about like how to get to work, but I'm thinking, oh, I have found a solution for this problem at work, and then you're thinking about other things, and you just relaxed. And if there's a sound somewhere, like you're not startled anymore. You just, oh, okay, that's just like some drops falling or whatever. And then the guy, like the suspicious guy that was there hanging out, like smoking, he starts saying, hi, hello. And you start saying, hello, hello, every morning. Like, and then after a few days, he says, hey, he starts like, you start chatting with the guy. He says, oh, hey, I work in this bakery here. Like, I'm just on my break and I work in this bakery, but we made like too many cinnamon buns today, and we have so much left over. Like, would you like some? And you're like, oh, great. So the guy goes in and gets like a bag with like cinnamon buns and gives it to you. And then you start walking, and then like once in a while, he will give you some cinnamon buns that are left over. And then you start realizing, oh, this, and then you start chatting with the guy, and it turns out that he's a really great guy, and he's just working in this bakery to make money for his family, and but he's really like studying to be an architect, and you start to have like this, oh, this is a really great guy, like, wow, nice guy, and you start like to look forward to seeing the guy there. So that means that your opinion of this person has changed from negative to positive. So and this is what it means. Desensitizing is getting used to the unfamiliar. So when you're walking in your alley, you just get used to it. It's just like, oh, this is just the way it is here. You get used to it. That's desensitizing. And counter conditioning is where you change your mind. You turn your negative opinion into something positive. So, and this is what we do with the dogs that are anxious and fearful. We try to, and it works together. Sometimes you can't really separate desensitizing from counter conditioning, but it doesn't really matter. It all works together. So this is what we work on when we're trying to change the dog's mind. So here I have another game. So if you have your dog there and a few treats, I'd like you to join me in this game. So I'm going to show you a short video if it will play. If not, I'll just show you here on the my video. Yeah, I'm going to show you this video. It's only 3 minutes. A little demonstration of the hand game. So for the hand game, we need treats, like small treats, and we put them in the hand. Can you see that? All right, so he knows there's treats there. Now I'm just going to like open my fingers and the treat falls out. So it's exciting because it doesn't know exactly when the treat is coming, and I try to like do like different fingers. That's okay, like you can never make a mistake. And probably eventually he'll try to like. So what you're doing here is you're making the dog focus his attention on your hand. Now he's focusing on the owner. But the point of the exercise is to make the dog focus on your hand. So you can, it's a really good exercise for people to, like, it makes the dog stay closer to you when you're going for walks. Also when you're calling them back, they're more excited to come back because they know you have the game going. Bruno! Okay. Bruno! Excited about the keys, but he's more excited about the treats falling down. There are 2 now. Almost got it. And that's it. Yeah, so the thing is when you give the treat like this, like normally, the dog sees the treat, he sees the hand coming, and the treat is coming, he knows the treat is coming. So it makes it more interesting when you have the treat in the hand and he doesn't know exactly when the treat is coming. So he will focus more just because he's more excited. Now he's starting to like catch them when they fall. And that's why this is more effective than just giving him the treats with your hand. All right. Oh no, you're a good student. All right. So do you want to play the game? Have you ever tried this with your dog? If there's anybody on the call who has their dog and some treats, you might want to try this. So I suggest just doing this for like 3 minutes at a time. Like you don't have to spend a lot of time. So like, well, now in here, my dogs are playing here in the background. It doesn't have to take a long time, and you could see also with this dog, Bruno is my sister's dog, and he got a little bit distracted because we were at the park and there were some geese flying around, but he always came back because he was very excited about the game. So this is the kind of thing that you can just incorporate into your daily walk, for example. You could go for a walk for a week and just bring treats and do this game. Stop for 3 minutes and do the game. Like this could, and doing these games, there's a purpose behind it. Like I said, the purpose is to get the dog to focus more on you. And if you have an anxious dog, for example, that gets scared of people or other dogs or something like that, they will start to focus more on you, and it will be easier to get them away from the, like, direct them and prevent them going into the red zone, and going back more into the yellow zone. Or if they're in the yellow zone, you can keep them there, so that, and keep them focused on you instead of the other thing that they're afraid of. And this will help you in the beginning, especially when you're starting. And then we go into more specific, depending on like what the problem is. We might go into specific exercises for desensitizing and counter conditioning. But this is an example of something that helps. It's really easy. It's fun for everyone. And you can just do it in your daily routine. So then you might ask, what's next? I want to just tell you a little bit about my membership. So like I said in the beginning, I decided to start a membership instead of just doing like these consultations, individual consultations with people, because I feel it's more effective. And I've been doing this for 2 years now. I started in Iceland with a group of Icelandic dog parents, and now I want to do it in English as well, because I feel that it's really paying off for people. I have people staying in the membership. Some people like to stay in the membership even though like they've been able to solve a lot of their problems, but they just like to be able to ask me questions whenever they like. So I also, like I told you, like there's no quick fix for behavioral problems. You can't just tell the dog not to be scared or anxious. You have to, you have to put in some effort, and it takes a while. So, and also a lot of people maybe couldn't afford a consultation. Or maybe they didn't really know me and weren't sure if they wanted to like work with me. And so I decided to start the membership so they could like just try it out and just pay a low monthly fee instead of like one big fee. So there's what I have in the membership. And I'm building this out in English now as well. So there's a membership area with training videos. And they can be on different topics. And I also talk a little bit about health in the membership because, well, I'm a vet and people ask me questions about health as well. And that's fine. Like it's not just for behavior if people need help with other things as well. There's a Facebook group for members. I have thought about like moving away from Facebook, but it's just where people hang out. So that's just the way it is. People are more likely to hang out in Facebook groups for social interaction. And it's really nice to also be in a group with other dog owners. Like there's no shaming or, and you can just be your crazy dog person self there. And twice a month I do I do live calls. So one time is like a webinar style where people just come on and you can just have your camera and your microphone off and just watch the training that I'm doing. And then after you can ask questions about anything, about the training or whatever else you want to ask questions. And sometimes I bring people on as panelists, or they just prefer to type the questions or just come on audio, just whatever feels comfortable. And then once a month I have like a meeting style gathering where people like have their camera and their microphone on and we just have a chat and they ask me questions and sometimes a question sparks a little info session, or sometimes we just talk about our dogs and what's going on with us, so we catch up with each other. And these like I talk about all these different topics. This is what and I go through like the 5 stages also with all the deep dive of the stages, and I like people to go through it in a specific order as well. So it's like dripped out. And if you want to learn, for example, the basics of clicker training or whatever else, and I also, of course, only use the positive and science-based training. And you can also ask me about health and veterinary advice. Sometimes people ask me, like people come on a call, they've been to the vets with their dog for some issue. And sometimes they come back home and they don't really remember what the vet said, or they didn't really understand it, or they just want another opinion. So they can ask me about that as well, if it's something that I will of course tell them, like if it's sometimes there are things that I just can't comment on because I don't have enough information. And then I will of course just tell them that, but often it's helpful for members to be able to have access to a veterinarian. So these Q&A calls, you can ask about behavior or health. So yeah, so it's like a bit like having like your own private veterinarian that you can just ask questions whenever. So I wanted to just give you, I'll put in the chat a link where you can just click on it and you get a checklist for your dog's first aid kit. So whether you have one or not, it's good to have a checklist. So if you have a first aid kit, I suggest people to go through it like at least once a year and just have a look and see if everything is still there, like did something get outdated or whatever, and do I have everything? Or if you don't have a first aid kit, I suggest to make it. You can either buy like a ready one, or you can just make it yourself using the checklist. I have sometimes people like had one person who was really, really happy about the checklist, and she made up first aid kits from the checklist and gave them as presents to her friends who had dogs. So it was really nice. So the price for the consultation, like this is different in different countries. So depending on where you are, I don't know about the prices in Ireland. They could be different from where I am. The price for the membership is $29 per month. So it's less than $1 per day, which I feel is like fair. And I wanted to give you, if anyone here is interested in trying out the membership, you can get a trial month for $5. So that you can join for 1 month, and then you can decide if you want to keep going or not. And so if you want to quit, you can just like do it yourself, or you can contact me if you want to stop the membership. And there's no questions asked or any problems with that. Also, if anyone from this community wants to join, I'm gonna give you as a bonus access to the bark workshop, which is a special workshop only on barking. Because like I told you before, this is the most common problem that people have. And the most common questions that I get, I saw some of the questions that we have already for today is about barking. And so this I will throw in as a bonus if you want to join. And yeah, so this is like a deep dive into barking, why dogs bark and how we can reduce barking. So we can reduce barking, even if barking is normal behavior for dogs. It doesn't mean that it's like behavior that can never change. We can still modify the behavior, even though it's normal behavior. So that's it for the presentation. So let's try. I see Christoph says it worked nicely on Sippy. I'm guessing that was the sit like turn your back and was that it, Gustav?
Yes.
Yeah, it worked well. That's good.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Yes. All
Yeah,
right.
I'm with my family, so
Hello.
We tried both games and
Yeah?
both worked nicely.
Great. Fantastic. I'm happy that people, that's why I really like it to have like a little bit of interaction. So people like do something as well. Because otherwise you just like, I know we're all a little bit tired now of the Zoom.
Right.
So it's fun when you like get to, there's a little bit of interaction and some action as well, not just sitting there.